The email notification came through just as Camille Whitaker stepped out of her car and handed the keys to the valet. Reservation confirmed for 2 at Harbor Tide. Friday, 7:30 p.m. Window seat, as requested. She didn't need to read the sender. It was forwarded from Grant's account. The same Grant who hadn't taken her to dinner in over 6 months. The same man who in public called her his other half and in private barely touched her hand anymore. Camille stood there for a second, still and unsmiling, as the Charleston breeze lifted the hem of her cashmere coat. Harbor Tide. Their dream restaurant. The one they talked about every anniversary but never went to. Too busy, he always said. Too many clients, babe. Now, suddenly, he wasn't too busy. Ma'am? The valet offered a polite smile, keys already in hand. Camille blinked back into the moment. Yes. Sorry. She walked into the conference hall, heels clicking against the polished floor of the historic venue. Tonight's lecture on sustainable business models felt like a cruel contrast to her own unraveling reality. She moved through a blur of greetings and polite applause, gave her talk, shook hands, answered questions. And all the while, that notification pulsed in her memory like a silent metronome. Friday, 7:30, window seat, for 2. Back home, the house was silent. It always was. The Whitaker estate sat just beyond the historic district, nestled behind trimmed hedges and iron gates. Elegant, perfect, curated, like everything in their life. Grant was still at the firm. He'd texted around 6 to say he had last-minute filings for a client out of Hilton Head. Camille didn't respond. She poured herself a glass of Pinot Noir and wandered into the sunroom. The air smelled faintly of jasmine and old wood. Photos lined the shelves, her at the College of Charleston, arms around beaming students. Grant at a gala, smile wide, hand on her waist. They looked like they had it all, and they did. On paper. Camille sat, wine in hand, and stared at the glass table. That reservation wasn't just a table. It was a confession, quiet, precise. Paid for in advance, just like everything else Grant did. Controlled, seamless. Clean, but not this time. She reached for his tablet, still synced to their shared calendar. She never checked his emails, not because she trusted him blindly, but because she believed in boundaries, or used to. Now, boundaries felt like blindfolds. She tapped through his calendar, Friday night blocked off. Meeting potential client was the note. Professional, innocent, a lie. Her fingers hovered over the mail icon. She paused, heart catching in her throat, then tapped. The inbox unfolded. The name hit her like a cold wave. Elena Morgan. Dozens of emails, short ones, long ones. Attachments, photos, notes. She clicked one, just one, subject, Friday. Can't wait to finally sit across from you like a real couple. You always said I looked best by the window. Maybe this time I'll wear that dress you liked. You know, the one you said your wife would never pull off. Camille exhaled slowly, not a gasp, not a cry. Just silence. She closed the tablet and set it on the ottoman like it had burned her. The glass of wine sat untouched. She walked upstairs, each step deliberate, like her mind had switched to autopilot. Grant's closet door was ajar. A faint scent of cedar and cologne hung in the air. She didn't go in. Instead, she entered her own study, clean, minimal, with a single photo of her late father on the desk. He had always said, "Don't let anyone else define what you tolerate." She stared at his smile and let her tears slide quietly down her cheeks. By morning, Camille had already called in her request for a 3-day personal leave, no explanations. No tears. She made tea instead of coffee, wore flats instead of heels, turned off her phone, and opened her laptop, Not to grade papers, but to do something she hadn't done in years. Search a stranger's name. Eleanor Morgan, Communications Director, Whitaker Cole, LLP. There she was, blonde, polished, younger. LinkedIn, Instagram, faculty gala photos. And then Daniel Morgan, husband, Charleston-based architect. Co-founder of Morgan Hunt Design. A photo of the two of them on their anniversary last fall. Daniel's caption, 5 years, still feels like one. Here's to my forever. Camille stared at the screen. Forever, she murmured. She opened her email and began to type. Subject, Collaboration Opportunity, College of Charleston Guest Lecture. Dear Mr. Morgan, I'm Camille Whitaker, a lecturer at the College of Charleston School of Business. I recently came across your firm's work on the Battery District Sustainability Redesign. We're hosting a spring seminar series on architectural ethics in urban expansion and would love to invite you for a private dinner to discuss a potential collaboration. I've made a reservation at Harbor Tide this Friday at 7:30 p.m. It's a bit short notice, but I hope you're available. Warm regards, Camille Whitaker. She didn't second guess, just hit send. The reply came within the hour. Thank you, Professor Whitaker. I'd be honored to join. Friday works perfectly. I look forward to it. Camille leaned back, the edges of her mouth tilting upward, not in triumph, but in steel. She picked up her phone and dialed Harbor Tide. This is Camille Whitaker. I need a table for 2 this Friday at 7:30, near the window if possible. And, she paused, if there's one next to the Hamilton reservation? Yes, ma'am, the hostess said. That can be arranged, Camille hung up. Then she whispered aloud to no one. Let's all have dinner, shall we? She closed her laptop. The storm had started. Quiet, precise, just like Grant. But this time, she wasn't going to stay seated in silence. She was choosing the table. If you enjoyed this video, comment 1 to let me know. If not, comment 2. Your thought mattered to me either way. The sun filtered through gauzy curtains as Camille sat at the breakfast table, her hands wrapped around a cup of tea gone cold. She hadn't slept, not really. Her thoughts had circled all night. Grant's email history, Elena's message, and the digital trail that now lived in her mind like a bad melody on repeat. Across from her, the chair sat empty, like it had every morning for the last year. Grant was already gone. An early flight to Colombia, supposedly. Another client, another calendar block. Her phone buzzed softly. Daniel Morgan, looking forward to meeting you Friday. Thank you again for the invitation. She stared at the message, simple. Polite, unknowing. Her thumb hovered over the screen, then tapped out a reply. Likewise. I'm sure it will be a thoughtful conversation. She sent it, then stood and walked to the window, watching the morning unfurl across the marshes behind their property. The sky was soft, almost apologetic. Camille pressed a hand against the glass. A knock startled her. She turned. Savannah stood on the porch, holding 2 coffees and a pastry bag in one hand, sunglasses pushed up in her hair. Charleston casual, but always elegant. You didn't answer last night, she said as Camille opened the door. I was busy, Camille said, her voice even but quiet. Savannah stepped in and placed the coffee on the marble island. Busy like grading papers busy or digging into your husband's digital closet busy. Camille said nothing. Savannah leaned in. Oh God, you found something, didn't you? Camille nodded once. Savannah exhaled. Do I need to bring out my emergency tiramisu? You know I keep one frozen for betrayal-related emergencies. Camille almost smiled, almost. It's her, she said, voice tightening. Elena, from the gala last spring. Blonde, PR director. Savannah's eyebrows arched. Of course it's her. She couldn't stop hanging on Grant's every word like he was the second coming of Southern charm. He made a reservation, Camille added. Harbor Tide. Friday. Window seat. Savannah blinked. He took her to the place you've wanted to go to for 3 years? Camille nodded again. Savannah muttered something under her breath, then softened. So, what's the plan? I already made a reservation. Savannah leaned forward. Tell me you did not. I did, Camille said quietly. I invited her husband. The silence between them stretched long and electric. Savannah finally sat down, slow and deliberate. You're telling me you're going to sit at the next table with the man she's betraying, while our charming golden boy whines and dines her like nothing's wrong? Camille looked up, eyes dry but resolute. Yes. Savannah was quiet for a moment. Then she reached into the bag, pulled out a croissant, and broke it in half. Well, she said, handing Camille a piece, remind me to never cross you. That afternoon, Camille returned to her office on campus to clear her inbox and set her away message. The halls were quieter than usual, spring break just a week away, but the hum of her colleagues' conversations echoed faintly from nearby rooms. As she sat at her desk, her phone buzzed again. A known number. Hi, this is Daniel Morgan. Just confirming Friday at Harbor Tide, 7:30 p.m., correct? Camille typed back, Yes, I'll be there. Looking forward to it. She hesitated, then added, You'll recognize me easily. I'll be in a teal dress. The send button felt heavier this time. The layers of intention in that message weren't lost on her. That evening, Grant returned home just before 8. Dinner? He asked, setting his briefcase down. I could use something light. Long day. Camille looked up from her book, keeping her tone calm. There's grilled salmon and couscous in the fridge. Grant smiled faintly. Perfect. You're the best. He moved toward the kitchen. Camille watched him open the fridge. He hummed as he poured a glass of white wine, moved casually, comfortably, as if nothing had changed. It was surreal, watching a man she'd loved for 18 years speak with the same mouth that whispered to someone else behind her back. You've got plans Friday night? She asked, voice even. Grant didn't flinch. Yeah, client dinner. Why? Just curious, she said, and looked back at her book. Want me to move it? He asked. No, I've got something on my calendar too. He nodded, like he wasn't paying full attention. I'll be back late. Camille didn't answer. Grant never noticed how quiet she had become, how each word was measured, how her eyes no longer followed him when he moved. Later that night, Camille stood alone in their walk-in closet, hand brushing over a row of untouched dresses. She found the teal one, the one Grant had once said was too bold for Charleston dinners. It shimmered under the soft lighting. She laid it out on the bed. She wasn't dressing for him this time. Friday would be a different kind of evening. Not about rage, not about confrontation. It was about clarity, truth, and the sharp edge of silence. The morning of the dinner arrived with an unsettling stillness. The kind of silence that doesn't soothe, it unsettles. Camille had slept no more than 4 hours, drifting in and out of shallow dreams where every version of Grant wore a different lie. She got up before dawn, brewed a single cup of black tea, and watched the sky shift over the marshes. The herons were out, walking through the reeds like nothing in the world could shake them. By 8, she was already at her desk, not at the university, but at the smaller antique desk in her sunroom where she handled personal matters. She reviewed the files for her mentorship initiative, scribbled notes for the proposal she'd present next week, and tried, unsuccessfully, to push Friday night out of her mind. Her phone buzzed. Daniel Morgan. Still good for tonight? Just want to make sure I have the time and place right. She typed back, yes, 7:30 at Harbor Tide, by the window. She added, I'm the one who'll look like I'm trying very hard not to look like I planned this. A few seconds later he replied, that makes 2 of us. Camille paused, reading his words again. It was the first time she allowed herself to wonder what kind of man Daniel really was. Not just a name with a wedding band, not just collateral damage in Grant's fantasy life. She clicked over to his firm's website again, Morgan Hunt Architecture. Clean lines, restorative design. There was a short video of Daniel speaking about preserving Charleston's historic buildings, and something in his voice caught her off guard. Steady, measured, not unlike her own. Don't do that, she murmured aloud, almost scolding herself. "He's not here to save you. You're not here to be saved." The afternoon crawled forward. Camille dressed slowly, deliberately. The teal silk slipped over her shoulders like a second skin, unexpectedly bold, yet grounding. Her earrings were small pearls, elegant but simple. Her makeup was subtle, warm-toned, designed not to impress but to protect, a kind of armor. She picked up her clutch and paused at the mirror by the hallway. A stranger might have called her powerful, but she could see it, the faint flicker in her eyes, the tightness at the corners of her mouth. She was holding herself together like a porcelain plate turned face down on the edge of a table. She arrived at Harbor Tide at 7:10, 15 minutes ahead of schedule. The hostess greeted her with the same careful smile Camille remembered from when she called. "Whitaker? Party of two?" "That's right," Camille replied. "You'll be seated right beside the Hamilton reservation," the hostess said gently, as if she'd guessed something more lived under the surface. "They haven't arrived yet." Camille followed the hostess through a path of low candlelight and polished wood floors. The scent of lemon butter and sea air mingled in the air. Outside, the water shimmered, the window glass just barely reflecting her outline. Her table sat perfectly, angled enough to see, not enough to be obvious. Camille took her seat, laid her clutch on the table, and exhaled. She looked toward the entrance once, then quickly down at the drink menu. 7:22. Her heart thrummed quietly beneath her ribs. "Camille?" She looked up. Daniel Morgan stood there, holding his coat, eyes uncertain but kind. He was taller than she expected, and slightly more undone around the edges than his photos had shown. A charcoal sport coat, button-down shirt, but no tie. There was something inherently honest about him, like he hadn't had time to rehearse how he should look for something like this. "Daniel," she said, rising and offering her hand. "Thanks for inviting me. Hope I'm not late." "Right on time." He took his seat across from her, glanced once at the view, then folded his hands gently on the table. "This place is beautiful," he said. "I've never been," she replied, "though I've heard it's good for special occasions." Their eyes met. Daniel didn't blink. "And is that what this is?" Camille smiled tightly, the edge of it bitter. "Not quite. Think of it more like a quiet unveiling." He nodded slowly. "Thought so." There was a pause as the waiter approached and took their drink orders. Daniel asked for bourbon. Camille requested a glass of Riesling. As the waiter walked away, Daniel leaned in slightly. "I'll admit," he said softly, "your invitation threw me. But when I saw the name Whitaker and the time and place, I started putting the rest together." Camille looked down, twisting the corner of her napkin. "You knew." "I suspected," he said, "but knowing and accepting are two different things." Another pause. "Does she know I'm here?" he asked. Camille shook her head. "Not yet." And then, like fate had been listening just outside the doors, they appeared. Grant entered first, confident as ever, dressed in the navy blazer she'd bought for his birthday last year. His hand lightly touched the back of Elena's waist as she stepped beside him, laughing, her red dress striking and sharp against the candlelight. Camille went still. Daniel stiffened but didn't look away. The hostess led them to their table, no more than 10 feet away. It was surreal, watching her husband smile, pour wine, tuck a loose curl behind Elena's ear like he used to do for her when they were first married. She felt a gentle shift under the table. Daniel's hand had moved slightly, not toward her, just enough to steady himself. "Do we say something?" he asked, voice low. Camille took a breath. "Not yet." Grant hadn't noticed her, but he would. And when he did, the performance would crumble. For now, she let the wine arrive. Let Daniel talk about the riverfront project his firm had just finished. Let the weight of the moment settle like silt at the bottom of a still pond. At 7:48, Grant's eyes finally landed on her, and froze. His body stilled, mid-sip, the stem of his wine glass hovering an inch from his lips. Elena turned to follow his gaze, and the color drained from her face in a single, elegant instant. Camille looked directly at them. No smile, no wave, just the kind of stillness that makes people look again and again, unsure if they've walked into a dream or a trap. She reached for her glass and sipped, her eyes never leaving her husband's. Then, turning to Daniel, she said softly, "Would you excuse me for just a moment?" He nodded. Camille stood, straightened her dress, and walked toward the storm she'd invited to dinner. Camille moved through the narrow aisle between tables, her heels clicking softly against the polished oak floors. Candlelight shimmered off wine glasses. The soft murmur of jazz floated above the clink of silverware. But to her, the sounds fell away, replaced by the quiet roar of composure tightening in her chest. She stopped a step away from their table. Elena was frozen mid-laugh, her expression suspended like a dropped glass about to shatter. Grant stood halfway, his face caught between surprise and dread. Camille tilted her head, her voice calm. "Evening." Grant blinked. "Camille." "What are you—" "Dining," she said gently, her gaze flicking to Elena. "Apparently, so are you." Eleanor's eyes darted to the side, searching for an exit not made of doors. Camille's voice dropped into something softer, more personal. "Do you think this table's close enough? Or should I ask the hostess to scoot it over a few inches, just so we're all nice and cozy?" Grant ran a hand through his hair, eyes wide. "This isn't what it looks like." Camille raised a brow. "Is it not? Because it looks exactly like the reservation I saw confirmed in your inbox. Same time. Same window seat." Eleanor opened her mouth to speak, but Camille held up a single hand. "I'm not here to yell," she said. "I've passed that phase. I'm here because I believe the people we deceive deserve a seat at the table. You brought her. I brought him." She glanced behind her as Daniel rose slowly from their table. His expression unreadable, jaw set like stone. "Daniel Morgan," she said smoothly, as Elena turned ghost pale. "I believe you've met his wife." Silence gripped the space between them, like the air itself had forgotten how to breathe. Elena stood, her voice barely audible. "Camille, please, not here." Camille leaned in just slightly, her tone never changing. "Why not here, Elena? You chose this place, this wine, that dress." Daniel approached, his steps measured. "You knew," he said to his wife, not accusing but dazed. "You knew I'd believe every word, that you were just working late, that we were just drifting a little. But this," he looked at Grant, "this was real for you, wasn't it? Not just a fling, not just one mistake." Grant didn't answer. The waiter approached hesitantly, menus in hand, his voice a whisper. "Would you like to combine tables?" Camille smiled politely. "Yes, I believe we're all in need of a conversation." Within minutes, the staff discreetly rearranged the tables, merging them into a single setting for 4. No one in the restaurant spoke above a murmur, but Camille could feel the tension ripple across the room like a dropped stone in water. They sat, Camille beside Daniel, across from Grant and Eleanor, like a courtroom without a judge. Just truth, finally taking its place at the head of the table. No one touched their wine. Grant looked at Camille, his voice hoarse. "How long have you known?" "Since Monday," she said. "You were in the shower. Your calendar pinged." "I checked the reservation. Harbor Tide. You'd never taken me here, but somehow she made the list." She turned to Elena. "The confirmation said, 'She'll love it.' And suddenly I remembered that you once told me at that charity auction that your dream dinner was here. I guess he listened." Elena's eyes brimmed. "It wasn't supposed to happen like this." "That's the thing about secrets," Daniel said quietly. "They don't stay in the dark forever. They always drag us back into the light." Camille studied him for a moment. He hadn't raised his voice, hadn't accused or attacked, and yet the sadness in his words pierced sharper than rage ever could. Grant leaned forward, fingers clasped. "Camille, don't," she said, not sharply, but with finality. "Not yet." The waiter returned. "Would you like to order?" Camille looked at him evenly. "We'll just take water." Once he left, Camille folded her hands on the table. "I'm not here for a fight. I'm here because I spent 18 years building something I thought was made of stone, only to find it cracked at the foundation. And before I walk away from it, I need to understand what happened." Grant inhaled. "It wasn't about you." "It never is," Camille replied. "Cheating rarely is. It's about escape, fantasy. Filling holes you don't have the courage to name." Eleanor looked down, her voice barely a whisper. "I didn't mean to fall into it. I felt invisible. And Grant, he saw me." Daniel turned to her, calm. "You mean the way I used to? When I redesigned your entire workspace so you'd feel inspired again? When I made you tea every morning, even when I was late for client calls?" Eleanor pressed her lips together. "I know." Camille sat straighter. "So here we are. All of us. And I'm not going to ask for apologies. I'm not here to shame you into regret." She looked across the table, eyes locked on Grant's. "I'm here to tell you that tonight I'm done being the quiet one. I'm done sitting at home, waiting for a man who's already emotionally gone." Grant's face crumpled. "Camille, I messed up. But please don't let this be the end." She didn't blink. "You ended this when you started texting her goodnight while I was still lying next to you. You ended it every time you smiled at her in public and left me in the shadows." She reached into her purse and pulled out a single envelope, sliding it across the table. "I've booked a room across the street for the night. I'll be back home Monday. It would be best if you weren't there when I return." Grant didn't touch the envelope. Daniel stood slowly, looking at Camille. "I think I need air." She nodded. "Me too." They left without another word. As they stepped outside, the cool, salt air met them like a balm. Camille exhaled, arms folded tightly, staring out over the water. Daniel stood beside her, quiet. After a moment he said, "That was the most graceful destruction I've ever witnessed." She smiled faintly. "I didn't want destruction. I wanted clarity." He looked at her. "You got it, even if it broke something in all of us." Camille turned to him. Would you mind walking with me for a bit?" Daniel nodded. And together they disappeared into the Charleston night, not as lovers or friends, not yet, but as two people who had just stepped out of the same fire, and somehow were still standing. Camille and Daniel walked without direction, their shoes clicking softly against the cobbled stones of East Bay Street, the moon casting delicate shadows across Charleston's historic facades. Gas lamps flickered in iron sconces, The breeze off the water was cooler now, lifting Camille's silk hem just enough to remind her she was still real, still grounded, even after everything that had unraveled inside that restaurant. She glanced sideways. Daniel's hands were in his pockets, his shoulders slightly hunched, as if his body was trying to process a truth his heart hadn't yet accepted. Neither spoke for the first few minutes. They didn't need to. Finally, he broke the silence. That wasn't how I pictured my Friday night. Camille exhaled, something between a laugh and a sigh. I don't think any of us did. He looked over. You planned it, though, not to ambush, but to expose it. She nodded. I couldn't scream. I didn't want to cry. I needed to show them. No drama, no theatrics. Just the truth, seated like a guest they didn't invite. Daniel stopped walking, turned toward the wrought iron railing that overlooked the bay. Boats drifted in the distance, quiet silhouettes against the glow of the harbor. She kept saying she felt unseen, he murmured, that I was too busy, too focused on work. And I've been trying to expand the firm, land bigger clients. I thought I was doing it for us. Camille leaned next to him, shoulder brushing the rail. That's the problem. We work so hard building lives that look beautiful from the outside. We forget to ask if anyone's still living inside. He glanced at her. Is that what happened with you and Grant? Her chest tightened, but she didn't flinch. We stopped talking. Not about groceries or work or which gala to attend. I mean really talking. The kind you do in the dark, lying awake at 1 a.m. Where you tell the truth, even if it's ugly. Daniel nodded slowly. And by the time you notice, it's not a marriage anymore. It's a project. Camille smiled bitterly. A performance. They stood in silence again. The kind of quiet that feels full, not empty. Then he asked, Why did you invite me? She didn't answer right away. Her eyes followed a couple walking hand in hand across the street, their laughter carried by the wind. I didn't know how else to show you, she said at last. To tell you what she was doing. I couldn't be the woman who sends anonymous screenshots or confronts you in a parking lot. That felt cruel. But inviting you to that table, letting you see it for yourself, I thought maybe it would hurt less if the truth was something we looked at together. He blinked, looking away for a second. It didn't hurt less, he said quietly, but at least I knew it wasn't a lie anymore. Camille felt the sting behind her eyes before she let herself acknowledge it. This wasn't victory. It wasn't revenge. It was two people collecting the remains of something sacred, something they hadn't broken, but had still lost. They walked again, slower now. You know, he said, voice softer, I used to draw you once. Camille's brow furrowed, half smiling in confusion. Me? Not you specifically, but someone like you. When I was in school, we had this assignment, sketching strength through stillness. I drew a woman standing by a window, hair up, holding a coffee in one hand, a letter in the other. I didn't know who she was, but tonight, watching you speak at that table, it brought that image back. Her throat tightened. She turned to him gently. What do you do when the image starts to feel real? Daniel looked at her, eyes clear but tired. You don't rush it. You don't define it. You just let it be. They reached the end of the pier, where the city lights gave way to the hush of water lapping against the dock. Camille paused, her hands on the railing. I have a room across the street, she said. I wasn't sure if I'd need it. I just couldn't go back home right after. Daniel nodded. I haven't decided where I'm going yet. Camille turned slightly toward him. Do you want to come up? Just to talk. He didn't hesitate. Yeah, I'd like that. They crossed the street in silence. The hotel lobby was hushed, the warmth of wood and brass enveloping them like a deep breath. The elevator ride was short, filled only by the soft hum of string music piped in through hidden speakers. Camille unlocked the room. Simple, elegant, with floor-to-ceiling windows facing the city. She slipped off her shoes the moment they entered, sighing as her feet met the plush carpet. Daniel walked in slowly, looking around. It's peaceful. She poured 2 glasses of water, handed him one. They sat in the armchairs by the window, just far enough apart not to assume, just close enough to feel less alone. Daniel looked out over the city. I thought if I ever got hurt like this, I'd fall apart. I always imagined I'd be the man who packs a bag, drives into the night, disappears for a few days. Camille smiled faintly. I used to think I'd be the woman who begged for answers, who screamed or cried or threw something just to feel in control. They both looked at each other, quiet, amused, tired. Instead, they had ended up here, in silence, side by side, breathing the same thick, uncertain air. I don't know what comes next, Camille said, her voice low. Daniel swirled the water in his glass, watching it ripple. Neither do I. She leaned back, eyes drifting up toward the ceiling. But maybe, she added softly, what comes next doesn't have to be defined right away. Daniel looked at her. Maybe it just starts with not going through it alone. The clock on the nightstand ticked gently. The city glowed below. The pain wasn't gone, but it had shifted. It had softened, and in its place was something unexpected. Not a spark, but the warmth of 2 people who had watched something end and were still choosing to stay present for whatever might quietly begin. Morning light spilled across the hardwood floor like it had been waiting all night to arrive. Camille sat cross-legged on the edge of the hotel bed, wrapped in a thick cream blanket, cradling a mug of coffee. The skyline beyond the tall windows was soft and hazy, Charleston just beginning to stretch awake. Below her, cars crept slowly along the quiet streets, unaware of the way her life had pivoted just 12 hours earlier. Daniel was gone. He'd left just after sunrise with a quiet thank you and the kind of glance that holds neither pressure nor expectation, just shared history. She hadn't needed to ask him to stay. That wasn't the point. Last night wasn't about a new beginning. It was about not falling apart alone. Camille sipped her coffee and exhaled, the kind of breath that felt earned, deep, steady, clean. She glanced at her phone. 3 missed calls from Grant. She didn't open the voicemail, not yet, maybe not ever. Instead, she opened the group text from the College of Charleston Faculty Board, an informal chat about next month's ethics symposium. She started typing, then paused. She wasn't ready for ordinary conversations yet. Her phone buzzed in her hand, a text from Savannah. Savannah saw the reservation pic making rounds on Low Country Society forum. You're not just a whisper anymore. You're a whole chapter. Camille blinked. She opened her browser and typed in the name of the local private Facebook group. Sure enough, there it was. A blurry photo. The table at Harbor Tide. 4 people seated. Tension thick in the air. Someone had posted a caption beneath it. When the wives pull the receipts and the side dish gets served cold. Charleston's elite dining drama last night. No names needed. You know who you are. Hundreds of comments. The usual online wildfire. Camille closed the page and tossed the phone on the bed. It wasn't rage that flooded her. It was fatigue. This wasn't just her story anymore. It had become a spectacle, a digestible, clickable fable. And yet none of them had felt the silence in that room. None of them knew how it felt to sip water while betrayal sat across from you pretending to be sorry. She needed space, not just from Grant, but from the noise. Camille stood, showered slowly, and dressed in soft linen slacks and a sleeveless blouse. She packed her things with practiced calm, slipping the envelope she'd given Grant back into her purse, untouched, unclaimed. The front desk clerk offered a polite smile as she checked out. "Everything to your satisfaction, ma'am?" Camille smiled, faint and real. "Actually, yes. It was exactly what I needed." She drove through Charleston's historic streets with the windows cracked, the scent of salt and magnolia drifting in. Her house waited quietly at the end of a shaded cul-de-sac, a place that had once held promise. Now it felt like a stage set after the final scene, everything still in place, but the script long abandoned. She stepped inside. Grant's shoes were gone. The silence confirmed what she already suspected. He had listened, or at least left. Camille moved through the rooms slowly, like she was re-entering a life that had kept moving without her. She passed the framed photos along the hallway, their honeymoon in Bar Harbor, a fundraising gala in 2016, a beach trip they had once pretended to enjoy. She didn't touch a single frame. Instead, she went straight to the laundry room and pulled a cardboard box from the cabinet. She moved deliberately, filling it with small things, tokens that had lost meaning. His watch stand, the extra phone charger on her side of the bed, a tie clip she'd gifted him after he made partner. Each object made her breath feel a little lighter. She didn't cry, she didn't curse, she just kept moving. That afternoon, she texted Savannah, "Can you meet for tea? Somewhere no one will recognize us." Savannah replied instantly, "On my way. I know a place. Trust me." 30 minutes later, they were tucked into a quiet garden courtyard behind a bookstore in West Ashley, shaded by live oaks. Camille held her tea with both hands, watching the steam curl upward. Savannah studied her. "You okay?" Camille shrugged. "Define okay." Savannah reached across the table, squeezed her wrist gently. "I saw the post. People are eating it up, like it's an episode of Southern Legacy." Camille smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "I didn't do it for them. I didn't do it to humiliate anyone. I just needed to make sure I didn't disappear in my own story." Savannah nodded, her expression softening. "And now?" Camille looked up. "Now, I figure out who I am without him. Without all of it." Savannah took a sip, then leaned in slightly. "And Daniel?" Camille paused. "I don't know. We shared a moment, a truth. But that doesn't mean anything else yet." Savannah tilted her head. "Would it be so wrong if it did?" "No," Camille said, "but I want him for the right reasons. Not just because we were both broken in the same place." They sat in quiet reflection. Then Savannah grinned. "You know what I think?" Camille raised a brow. "I'm almost afraid to ask. I think this whole city expected you to vanish quietly, to let it slide, to move out of the way so Grant could keep looking polished." Camille looked down at her cup. "And instead," Savannah continued, "you set the table yourself, and you didn't flinch." Camille felt her throat tighten again. But this time the tears didn't come from pain. They came from clarity. She whispered, "I didn't flinch." And she wouldn't. Not now. Not ever again. The doorbell rang just after 6 p.m., the chime echoing through the house like a question waiting for an answer. Camille stood in the foyer, her hand still resting on the frame of the hallway mirror. She hadn't been expecting anyone, but she knew before she opened the door who it would be. When she pulled it open, Grant stood there, no blazer, sleeves rolled up, face drawn. There was no arrogance now, no performance. He looked like a man who had spent the past 3 days trying to rehearse the perfect apology and still hadn't found the words. "I didn't think you'd be home," he said quietly. "I said I'd be back by Monday," she replied. "I keep my word." He nodded once, stepped back as if unsure whether to enter or retreat. Can I come in?" Camille studied him. Her silence wasn't punishment, it was protection. For her peace, for her future. But something in his eyes made her pause. Not pity, not longing, just a quiet resignation. She stepped aside. He entered slowly, looking around as if seeing the home for the first time without the illusion they'd built together. The scent of lemon oil and fresh linen lingered in the air. The furniture was untouched. The pictures still hung, but the energy had shifted. It no longer felt like their life. It felt like her space. Camille crossed her arms. "I boxed your things." "They're in the study." Grant nodded. "I saw. I'll get them later." He looked at her then, eyes dark with something deeper than regret. "I keep trying to find the words, Camille, and every time I start, they fall apart. Maybe that's because there's nothing left to explain," she said softly. He exhaled. "I didn't love her." "Don't," Camille said, raising a hand. "Don't reduce what happened to a feeling you can edit. It wasn't about love. It was about convenience, about ego, about telling yourself that your mistakes wouldn't cost you anything." Grant looked down. "I kept thinking you were just stressed," she continued. "I gave you space. I gave you grace. But what I didn't realize was that I was shrinking to make room for your excuses." He looked up slowly. "I didn't know how lost I was, until the night at Harbor Tide. Seeing you there, across from him, I didn't know how strong you were." Camille's voice was even. "That wasn't strength. That was necessity." A pause hung between them. Grant walked to the window, hands in his pockets. "The truth is, I thought you'd always be there. I thought I could make my mistakes quietly and clean them up before they ever reached your side of the bed." Camille watched him. "You were so poised," he said. "So composed, I mistook that for detachment, but it was devotion. And I didn't deserve it." She didn't correct him. After a long silence, he turned to face her again. "Is there any part of you that wants to try one more time?" The ache in his voice was real, but Camille had long since stopped mistaking sincerity for solution. "I think," she said gently, "what you miss is not me. It's the version of yourself you were when you had me." Grant's eyes closed briefly, like that truth hit harder than he expected. She stepped forward, her voice softer now. "And I won't be the woman who makes it easier for you to forgive yourself." They stood in the quiet weight of goodbye. "I'll have someone pick up the boxes tomorrow," he said, stepping toward the door. Camille nodded. As he opened it, he turned once more. "For what it's worth, I hope one day someone sees you the way I should have." She didn't reply. The door closed behind him with the softest click. Later that night, Camille found herself back at her desk, flipping through the guest speaker files for the ethics seminar. A name caught her eye: Daniel Morgan. He had been referred weeks ago for a panel on sustainable design. She'd dismissed it then. Now the coincidence made her smile. Her phone buzzed. "Daniel, I hope you're okay." "Not asking for anything, just Checking in. Camille stared at the message. Her fingers hovered above the screen. She typed, "I had to close a door today. It wasn't loud. Just final." His response came quickly. Sometimes, silence is the loudest sound of all. She set the phone down, closed the laptop, and walked to the kitchen. She poured herself a glass of wine, one she didn't have to share, didn't need to justify, and stepped outside to the back patio. The sky above Charleston was ink dark and scattered with stars. She sat, legs tucked beneath her, watching the branches sway gently overhead. And for the first time in a long while, she felt it. Not joy, not relief, but stillness. The kind that only comes when there's nothing left to fight. No more pretending to hold together a version of yourself you've already outgrown. Her phone vibrated once more. "Daniel, if you ever want to talk, if you ever... or walk, or just sit and pretend none of it ever happened, I'm here." Camille stared at the message, the wind brushing lightly against her cheek. She didn't answer right away. She didn't need to, not yet. Tonight wasn't about what came next. It was about standing still, on her own porch, in her own life, in the silence she had earned, and letting the stillness speak. The following morning, the scent of roasted beans filled Camille's kitchen as she poured her first cup of coffee into her favorite stoneware mug, the one with the slight crack near the handle that she never replaced. The air was still, golden light warming the edges of the marble countertops. She leaned against the island, breathing it all in. This was hers again. The house. The morning. The silence. No more waiting for Grant's footsteps overhead. No more pretending his early meetings didn't taste like perfume and lipstick. Just Camille, standing exactly where she had once felt invisible, now entirely seen by herself. The doorbell chimed. She frowned, glancing at the clock. It was just after 9. Through the glass, she saw a familiar figure holding a pastry box and a coffee carrier. "Daniel." She opened the door, one brow raised. He smiled, a little sheepish. "I wasn't sure if you'd be up. I figured if I was bringing carbs and caffeine, I might be forgiven." Camille stepped aside. "You're lucky I haven't had breakfast." He walked in, his presence casual but respectful. He set the box on the kitchen island and opened it to reveal 2 oversized almond croissants and a neatly packed tray of cappuccinos. "French bakery on King Street," he said. The woman behind the counter said, "You must be in trouble." Camille chuckled, unwrapping one of the croissants. "Well, you're not..." "Yet." They ate in near silence for a moment, the kitchen filled only with the sound of flaky pastry and soft sips. Then Daniel spoke. "I wanted to see how you were doing." "Not over text, not as a check-in, just in person." Camille wiped her fingers on a napkin. "You didn't need to, but I'm glad you did." Daniel nodded. "I keep thinking about that night. The restaurant. The way we just sat in it, didn't run from it. I don't know if that made it harder or easier." Camille looked at him. "I think it made it honest." He leaned on the counter, facing her more directly now. "I filed the papers yesterday." She blinked. "You did?" He nodded slowly. It felt strange. Not sad, not angry, just real. Like closing a door I'd been standing in for too long. Camille met his eyes. "That's exactly how I felt when Grant left. No drama. No ceremony. Just an ending that had already happened." They sat with that thought for a moment. Then he reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. He slid it across the counter. "What's this?" she asked, unfolding it. "It's a sketch," he said. "I did it after I left your hotel room that night. Couldn't sleep. The lines were soft, purposeful. A woman standing alone on a balcony, hair swept back, a coffee cup in one hand. Her eyes weren't drawn, just blank space. But somehow, it felt like she was looking inward, not outward. Camille touched the edge of the paper. "You saw me." Daniel's voice was gentle. "You're hard to miss." The vulnerability in that moment didn't feel romantic. It felt reverent, like two people standing in the ashes of something sacred, recognizing the same soot on each other's hands. Camille set the sketch down and folded her arms loosely. "I'm not sure I'm ready for whatever this is." "I know," he said. "That's why I brought coffee instead of flowers." She smiled genuinely this time. "I'm not here to start something you're not ready for, Camille," he added. "But I am here, however you need." She stared at him for a beat. "You always this patient?" He shrugged. "I design buildings. If I rushed every foundation, nothing would last." That made her laugh, quiet and sudden, the kind that caught her by surprise. He smiled too, watching her like a man who had no expectations, only presence. "Come on," she said, grabbing her keys from the hook. "Walk with me." They stepped into the cool morning air. The neighborhood was still quiet, the world not quite rushed yet. Camille led them down the cobblestone sidewalk lined with crepe myrtles and flowering shrubs. A soft breeze moved through the trees, tugging gently at her cardigan. "I used to walk this loop when things felt heavy," she said, "when Grant would be gone on business, or when the silence in the house got too loud." Daniel nodded, his pace matching hers. "I did the same. Only, I walked the downtown pier. Something about the water helped me breathe." They turned a corner, sunlight filtering through Spanish moss overhead. "What scared me the most," Camille said after a moment, "was not that Grant betrayed me. It was how long I ignored myself, how many red flags I painted white just to keep the peace." Daniel didn't respond right away. Then he said, "I kept fixing our house instead of our marriage. I thought if the drywall was fresh and the patio was perfect, maybe the cracks inside us wouldn't spread." Camille looked at him. "We tried. In the wrong ways, maybe. But we did." He nodded. "And now, we're here." They walked a few more steps, in thoughtful quiet. Finally, she asked, "Do you ever feel guilty for not hurting more?" He turned to her, surprised by the question. "Yes," he admitted. "Sometimes I wonder if not being destroyed means I didn't love her enough." Camille's voice was soft. "I wonder that too. But I think we gave so much of ourselves to the wrong version of the people we loved. And maybe when the truth showed up, we weren't grieving them. We were grieving who we had to become, just to stay." They stopped beneath a wide oak. Daniel looked at her, eyes steady. "You say things that make silence feel like company." Camille took a breath. "I don't know if I'm ready for anything beyond this." "Me neither," he said. "But I am ready to be here." "For real, for whatever this is, without hiding." The wind moved through the trees, carrying their stillness forward. And for the first time, Camille didn't feel like she was standing in a pause. She felt like she was finally moving, steady. Honest. With someone who didn't ask her to rush, only to be. The next week unfolded with the deceptive calm of a southern spring. Camille returned to work, each day walking through the arched stone halls of the College of Charleston with quiet purpose. Her students noticed a shift, more direct, more grounded, but couldn't name it. She didn't dress differently, didn't speak louder. But the way she held silence now carried weight. On Thursday afternoon, she was reviewing final proposals for the upcoming ethics symposium when Savannah appeared in her office doorway, unannounced, holding 2 iced lattes and wearing that face, half concerned, half knowing. Camille looked up. "You're early." Savannah slid into the chair across from her. "Because I saw something, and I need you to breathe before I show you." Camille closed her laptop. "I'm listening." Savannah handed her the phone, a still frame from a local magazine's gossip column. It showed Grant, alone this time, at an art gala downtown, standing near a woman Camille didn't recognize. The caption underneath read, "Newly solo real estate mogul, Grant Whitaker, makes his first public appearance post-scandal. Sources say he's staying out of the spotlight, but not alone for long." Camille read it once, then again, and handed the phone back. "No reaction?" Savannah asked, studying her. Camille leaned back in her chair, folding her arms. "I thought I'd feel something. Jealousy? Rage. Maybe some kind of hollow ache. But honestly, it's just noise. He was always good at appearances. This is just him trying to polish a broken mirror." Savannah smiled. "I was hoping you'd say that." "You're stronger than you used to be." "No," Camille said, her voice calm. "I'm just no longer invested in illusions." That night, she got home late and found a small white envelope tucked between the slats of her front door. No return address. Just her name written in ink too familiar to miss. She opened it slowly. Inside was a folded letter, handwritten. "Camille, I know I said goodbye. I know I forfeited the right to ask anything of you. But I need to tell you this. You were the best thing I never really saw, not because you were invisible, but because I was blind. I chased what looked like freedom and found myself in a room full of echoes. I'm leaving Charleston, selling my stake in the firm. I thought it would make me feel like I was starting over. But the truth is, I feel like a man who lit a fire just to see what would burn. I'm walking away from the ashes. If you ever think of me, I hope it's not as the man who betrayed you. I hope it's as the man who finally saw you, for who you were, and what I was too small to hold. Grant." She read it twice, then folded it back into the envelope and placed it on the kitchen counter, next to a blooming vase of white tulips. She didn't cry. She didn't smile. She just let the words land. And stay there. The next day, she found herself in the campus cafe, editing final notes for the speaker lineup. Her eyes flicked to the door more often than she liked to admit. At 11:02, Daniel walked in, pressed shirt, sleeves rolled, sketchpad under his arm. He spotted her, smiled gently, and walked over. "Good timing," she said. "I was just pretending not to check my phone every 2 minutes." He chuckled. "Well, I was just pretending not to rehearse what I'd say if you weren't alone." They sat. No need for greetings anymore. They had grown past that. Daniel placed his sketch pad on the table, but didn't open it yet. "You doing okay?" he asked. Camille nodded. "Grant left town. He wrote me a letter." Daniel looked at her carefully. And it said everything I already knew," she replied. "But it wasn't for me. It was for him. To make peace with himself. And I'm okay with that." Daniel studied her, then reached for his pad. "That's why I brought this." He flipped it open to a new sketch. A table, 4 seats, 2 empty. 2 still occupied. She blinked at it. "You drew that night?" "I did," he said. "It's not just a picture. It's perspective. Sometimes the people who leave the table were never meant to stay. They just helped you see where the light actually falls." Camille ran her fingers over the page. "That's beautiful." He closed the pad, met her eyes. "I'm not in a hurry, Camille," he said. But I won't lie. I think about you, in ways that go beyond late-night walks and shared silences. Her breath caught, but not from fear. I think about you too, she said quietly, but I'm still learning how to be whole on my own. He nodded. Then let's do that. Together, separately. She smiled. The bell above the cafe door jingled as a breeze swept through. Outside, the city moved as it always had. Slow, timeless, layered. Camille reached across the table, placed her hand over his. We'll build something, she said. But not from scraps, from strength. And just like that, a new story began, not out of desperation, not from the ruins, but from two steady hands, reaching forward with nothing to hide. It had been nearly 2 weeks since Camille received Grant's letter, and just as quietly as he had slipped out of her life, the ripple he left behind had finally begun to still. Each morning now arrived without the weight of second-guessing. Her house felt like her own, the silence inside it no longer hollow, but restorative. Still, change was a peculiar thing. It never came all at once. It arrived in fragments. How the light hit the kitchen table at 8:07 instead of 8:15. How her breath came easier while brushing her hair. How she paused before reaching for the second cup of coffee, realizing she didn't need it just to feel busy. But this morning brought something else. An invitation. Camille stood by her front window, rereading the embossed card that had arrived in the mail. Retirement celebration for Professor Evelyn Mercer. May 22nd, 6 p.m. at the Laurel Conservatory. Evelyn Mercer, her first mentor, her fiercest advocate. The woman who once told her in grad school, "Never let a man's insecurity shrink the room you're meant to own." Camille had looked up to her for decades. And now, the thought of walking into that ballroom, solo, with a dozen familiar faces watching for signs of damage, it pressed a kind of pressure on her chest that she hadn't expected. Not because she wasn't healed, but because people often confuse dignity with coldness, and she was tired of explaining the difference. Her phone buzzed on the kitchen island. Daniel. Lunch break escape. I'm thinking rooftop, fresh air, and your judgmental looks over my coffee habits. She smiled and tapped back. You're lucky I like the view. Give me 30. They met atop the rice mill building, their new favorite escape, brick-lined rooftop, overlooking the quiet bend of the Ashley River. Camille arrived with her tote bag slung over one shoulder, wind tugging playfully at her blouse. Daniel was already there, sitting cross-legged with a sketch pad balanced on one knee. He looked up as she approached, offering a quiet smile, the kind that didn't announce anything but still said everything. You brought the judgment, he said. I can feel it already. She sat beside him, tucking her legs underneath. That's not judgment. That's discernment. He laughed. Ah. My mistake. They shared a sandwich and stories from their week, her update on the symposium lineup, his rant about zoning red tape. It was easy now, this rhythm they'd found. Not rushed. Not defined. Just steady. After a lull, she reached into her bag and pulled out the invitation. I got this. Daniel took it, scanning the ornate script. Evelyn Mercer. She's the one who threatened to retire for the last 5 years? The very one, Camille said. She's finally doing it. He handed it back. You going? Camille hesitated. I think I should. I want to. But walking into that room... Daniel looked at her. You think they'll be watching? I know they will, she said. Half of Charleston's faculty wives, board members, and socialites will be lined up, waiting to see if I flinch, if I still wear the same heels, if I'm thinner, happier, ruined. Daniel paused, then said gently, So let them watch. She glanced at him, eyebrows raised. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. Let them see you, whole. Composed, unapologetic. You don't have to prove anything. Just walk in with the peace you've already earned. Camille's throat tightened. The words landed in that soft space inside her, where courage lived, still catching its breath. You'd come with me? She asked, the question barely above a whisper. Daniel looked at her for a long moment. If you want me to. Camille exhaled slowly, as if she hadn't realized she was holding her breath until that moment. I don't want to use you as a shield. I won't be, he said. I'll be a mirror, just reflecting what they should have seen all along. Their eyes held, and Camille felt something shift, not forward, not back, just deeper. A trust rooted not in need, but in knowing. That weekend, she stood in her closet longer than usual. She ran her fingers over dresses in shades of black, navy, crimson. Then she stopped on a sleek, simple ivory gown. It wasn't loud, but it whispered elegance, confidence, grace with an edge. She pulled it from the hanger. Across the room, the photo of her and Grant at their 10-year anniversary still sat on the dresser. She walked over, picked it up, and for the first time, placed it face down, not in anger, just peace. When the night of the celebration arrived, Camille stood in front of her mirror one last time. Her hair was swept up, earrings delicate pearls. No overstatement. No apology. She looked like herself. Fully. Daniel arrived 10 minutes early, dressed in a dark gray suit with no tie, a touch of stubble softening his usual clean lines. You look right, he said, meeting her at the door. Camille smiled. So do you. They walked into the Laurel Conservatory side by side. Lights shimmered overhead, soft jazz played in the background, and heads turned, some with surprise, some with curiosity. But Camille kept her posture tall, her pace measured. Not guarded, grounded. Professor Mercer was already seated near the front, surrounded by old colleagues and former students. When she saw Camille approach, her face lit up. My brightest storm, she said, standing with effort to hug her. I told them you'd come. Camille laughed. You always did have too much faith in me. No, Evelyn replied, just enough. As they sat, Daniel leaned slightly toward her. You were right. They're watching. Camille looked across the room, at the sideways glances, the murmured names. She took Daniel's hand, let it rest gently in hers, and whispered, Then let them watch me rise. Camille hadn't expected the moment to feel like this. As she stood at the center of the Laurel Conservatory's ballroom, the air thick with laughter, clinking glasses, and polite Charleston chatter, she felt an ache rise. Not from grief, but from growth. She wasn't the same woman who had stood quietly beside Grant at galas past, smiling politely, making room for his spotlight. She wasn't the same woman who once believed elegance meant staying small to keep the peace. Tonight, her presence filled the room without apology. Professor Evelyn Mercer took to the podium as the evening reached its peak, her frail hands steady on the edges of the lectern. The crowd hushed as she cleared her throat, her voice fragile but precise. There are few things I've done right in this long, messy life, she began, the corners of her mouth curling. But choosing to teach and choosing to speak my mind, well, those are two I'll never regret. Soft laughter rippled through the room. Evelyn's eyes scanned the audience. But tonight isn't just about the things I've done. It's about the people I've seen. The ones who walked into my classroom unsure, unpolished, but unwilling to disappear. Her gaze landed on Camille. And if you'll all indulge an old woman one last time, I'd like to ask one of those people to come up here and speak. "Camille Whitaker, would you join me?" The room turned. Camille froze for a moment, breath caught in her chest. Daniel, seated beside her, reached for her hand. Not to push, just to anchor. She stood, smoothing the ivory fabric of her dress with trembling hands, and walked slowly toward the podium. Her heels echoed against the marble floor, but her steps were even, unshaken. Evelyn stepped aside, whispering as Camille passed. "Let them see what power sounds like." Camille stood behind the microphone, heartbeat pounding in her ears. She looked out at the room, faces from every season of her life, now waiting for her voice. She didn't reach for her notes. She didn't need them. "When I first walked into Professor Mercer's class, I was 21 and terrified," she began. "Terrified I wasn't smart enough, sharp enough, or strong enough to be heard." A murmur of agreement floated from the crowd. "But she didn't let me shrink. She didn't hand me softness when I wanted to hide. She handed me clarity. She told me that intellect without truth is just noise." Camille paused, breath steadying. "I've spent most of my adult life learning how to hold truth in one hand and grace in the other. But recently, I realized something else. That strength isn't about never breaking. It's about breaking with purpose. It's about rebuilding yourself without asking permission." A woman in the back nodded slowly, lips pressed together. Camille scanned the room, then met Daniel's eyes. He was still, watching her like the only thing in the room that mattered. "A few months ago," she continued, "my life changed." Quietly, dramatically, publicly. "I went through something that stripped me of the role I had perfected. The wife, the polished partner, the woman who stayed in the frame no matter how small it became." She inhaled, and for the first time, I stepped out of it. There it was, truth laid bare, without shame, without bitterness. Just ownership. "I'm not telling this story to be dramatic," she said, voice softening. "I'm telling it because someone in this room may still be shrinking, still editing themselves for comfort, still measuring their worth against someone else's love." She looked down, then back up. "Don't." The room was so still, even the chandelier seemed to pause. "You are not someone's second thought, or cautionary tale, or what if. You are the writer of your story, and your voice, especially when it shakes, is still sacred." There was no applause at first. Just quiet. Deep, reverent quiet. Then, as if the entire room exhaled together, the first hands began to clap. Slow, rising, thunderous. Evelyn wiped her eyes. Savannah stood and clapped hardest of all. And Daniel didn't move. He just looked at her, pride resting so openly in his gaze it felt like a blanket draped around her shoulders. Camille stepped down from the podium, her chest warm with something bigger than relief. It was release. Back at their table, Daniel stood as she approached, pulling her chair out gently. "You didn't speak," she said, settling beside him. He leaned close. "Because I didn't want to interrupt the moment you became more than what they remembered." She laughed quietly, her hands still trembling. A server passed with champagne flutes. Camille took one and raised it just to him. "To truth," she said. Daniel touched his glass to hers. "To whoever you become next." They didn't need to name what was forming between them. It was too soon, too sacred. But it was real. It lived in the pauses between words, in the way he watched her like she had nothing to prove, only unfold. Later that evening, as they stepped into the night air, the city lights blinking gently above the quiet streets, Camille turned to Daniel just before they reached her car. "You didn't have to come tonight," she said. He looked at her, smile steady. "I didn't come for the event. I came for the woman stepping into her power." Camille paused. "That speech, it wasn't about Grant." "I know," he said. That's what made it powerful. And as she looked at him, this man who asked for nothing, expected nothing, but saw everything, she felt it. The shift, the turning point. Not a happy ending, but a beginning, rooted in truth, wrapped in grace, ready for whatever came next. Camille sat at the edge of her porch swing the next morning, a mug of coffee cupped between her palms, the breeze soft against her cheek. The air smelled faintly of honeysuckle, and the morning sun filtered through the Spanish moss in streaks that looked like brushed gold. She had barely slept, not because of unrest, but because her mind wouldn't stop replaying the way the room felt when she spoke. The silence, the thunderous applause, the way Daniel looked at her, not like she was someone who'd survived, but someone who'd arrived. Her phone buzzed beside her on the cushion. "Savannah, you broke the internet." "Well, at least the low country part of it." Camille smiled and opened the link she sent. It was a short clip from the celebration, recorded from the back of the room. Her voice echoed through the phone, steady and sure. "You are not someone's second thought." She paused the video, set the phone face down. She didn't need to watch it again. She was living it now. The screen buzzed again. "Daniel, do you have 20 minutes? I want to show you something." She hesitated, then typed back, "I have 30. "You'll owe me coffee for the extra 10. He responded with a thumbs-up emoji and a location pin. Camille changed into jeans and a linen blouse, pulled her hair into a low twist, and grabbed her keys. 15 minutes later, she pulled up to a building she hadn't seen in years. A small brick warehouse near the port, nestled between two renovated storefronts. Daniel was waiting outside, leaning casually against the doorway, sketchpad tucked beneath his arm like always. He smiled when he saw her. "I thought you were going to make me sign a visitor log," she teased, stepping out of her car. "No forms today," he said, holding the door open. "Just trust." Inside, the space was raw. High ceilings, exposed beams, brick walls, still dusty from time. Natural light poured through the tall windows, casting long rectangles across the concrete floor. Camille's footsteps echoed as she walked further in. "What is this place?" "My next project," Daniel said. "Or at least, I hope it will be." He walked to a table near the back, spreading out a series of blueprints. It's been vacant for years, but the foundation is strong. Bones are clean. The idea is a shared space. Workshops, open gallery, maybe a cafe. A place for community, creativity, healing. She studied the plans. The open areas, the layers of intentionality. "It's beautiful." He looked at her. "It's honest." There was a quiet moment between them, thick with implication, but unrushed. Camille turned back to the windows. "Why did you want me to see this?" "Because it's like you," he said simply. Unpolished, but ready. Wounded once, but not defined by it. "I wanted to show you that you're not the only one rebuilding." Her breath caught. It wasn't the words. It was how gently they landed. "I've been thinking about doing more with the business program," she said slowly. "Creating something for women, especially those starting over. Career pivots, post-divorce, reinvention, a mentorship lab." Daniel smiled. "Say that again." She blinked. "Why?" "Because that's the most certain I've ever heard you sound." Camille laughed, but her throat tightened. What if I'm just saying it to feel brave? Then say it again, until it stops being about fear and starts being about truth. They stood there in the open room, sun on their faces, future somewhere between the plans on the table and the fire in her chest. Camille reached for the edge of the blueprint, fingertips brushing the lines. You really believe in new things, starting from broken places, don't you? Daniel didn't hesitate. It's the only way I know how to build anything worth keeping. Later that afternoon, back at home, Camille sat in her office staring at the cursor, blinking on a blank document titled Proposal, Women in Transition, Mentorship Program. She placed her hands on the keys. She didn't type, not yet. Instead, she sat still, letting the momentum of what was becoming take shape. The speech, the applause, the invitation to the warehouse, the way Daniel hadn't pushed, just opened a door. She thought about the room, about the woman standing behind the podium, about her voice, unwavering, about the weight she no longer carried. And then, finally, she began to write, not for the approval of others, not to prove anything, but because the story was shifting from reflection to purpose, and purpose always begins with a decision to keep going, even when no one's watching, even when the applause fades, even when you're scared, especially then. Camille was walking through the vendor stalls at the Saturday morning market on Marion Square, a woven bag over her shoulder, when she heard her name spoken softly behind her. Camille? She turned, slow and cautious, already recognizing the voice before she saw the face. Elena, hair darker now, a little shorter, her signature red lips gone, replaced with something muted, almost faded. She stood with her arms tucked into herself, not out of arrogance, but protection. Camille blinked, lips parting slightly. Elena. They hadn't spoken since that night at Harbor Tide, since the quiet unraveling. Elena started, her voice brittle. I didn't expect to see you here. I live 10 minutes away, Camille said, not coldly, just simply. A truth, nothing more. Elena nodded once, glancing around as if she were waiting for the ground to offer her an escape route. Do you have a minute? Camille hesitated. The breeze picked up, brushing across her cheek and carrying the scent of peaches and rosemary from a nearby stall. One, she said. Elena exhaled like she'd been holding it in for weeks. I wanted to say I'm sorry, she began. Not just for what I did, but for how small I made you in the process. You didn't deserve to be erased like that. Camille stood still, the world dimming a little around the edges. I was broken in places I didn't even understand, Elena continued. But that didn't give me permission to steal someone else's peace just because mine was shattered. The words were raw, not polished, not strategic. I thought he loved me, she said. And maybe for a moment he did. But even that came from a place of avoidance, not connection. We were both hiding in each other. Camille tilted her head. And now? Elena smiled, but it was soft and almost tired. Now I'm rebuilding. Slowly. I've started painting again. I took a job out in Asheville. Less pressure, more room to breathe. Camille nodded, eyes softening. Good. I read about your mentorship program, Elena added. It's beautiful. You're doing something that actually means something. Camille glanced away for a second, eyes fixed on a mother lifting her toddler up to smell a basket of lavender. It's not about me anymore, she said. It's about showing women that the ending of one chapter doesn't mean their worth expired with it. Elena was quiet. Then, thank you for not destroying me when you had the chance. Camille met her eyes, steady. I didn't need to. You were already standing in the wreckage. I just chose not to stay there with you. Elena's throat moved as she swallowed. I hope one day we both become the women we were pretending to be back then. Camille nodded. I think we already are. Elena offered the faintest smile, then turned and walked away, her frame disappearing between rows of produce and local honey jars. Camille didn't watch her go. She looked up instead, into the stretch of sky above the square, vast and open. Her phone buzzed. Daniel, lunch at the warehouse. Just picked up soup from that spot you like. Camille smiled. On my way. 20 minutes later, she was perched on a folding stool inside the warehouse, sunlight flooding the space through the arched windows. Daniel was kneeling near the wall, taping outlines on the floor where display tables would eventually go. Everything okay? He asked, as she handed him a drink. She nodded, sliding the soup container from the bag. I ran into Elena. Daniel paused, brows raised slightly. How was that? Unexpected, she said. Strange. And somehow healing. She took a sip, then looked at him. It's funny. I thought if I ever saw her again, I'd want to say so much. But standing there, I realized I didn't need to say anything more than what I already had. Daniel nodded slowly. Closure doesn't always come with confetti. Sometimes it's just a quiet acknowledgement that you've outgrown the pain. Camille leaned her head against the frame of the window, letting the light spill across her collarbone. She said she's rebuilding. I believed her. And you? He asked. She looked around the room, at the taped lines, the open walls, the beams catching light. I'm building, she said. Not just again, but differently. For the first time, it's not about restoring what was. It's about designing something that fits who I've become. Daniel smiled. You always did have good structure. She smirked, tossing a napkin at him. When they finished eating, Camille walked to the center of the room, standing still. What are you seeing? Daniel asked, rising to join her. She closed her eyes. Possibility. He stood behind her, not touching, just there. Can I ask you something? Always. If one day this became more than just companionship, if it became something real, steady, imperfect but ours, would you be open to that? Camille turned toward him, heart steady but full. Yes, she said. But only if it grows at the speed of truth. He reached for her hand, not to claim it, but to meet it. And she didn't flinch. Not this time. Because what they were building wasn't made of repairs or regret. It was made of clarity, and the courage to trust something that hadn't hurt her yet. A soft rain tapped against the windows of Camille's sunroom, casting the morning in a quiet grey. The kind of Charleston morning that made the city feel like it was still dreaming. Everything slowed, still, hushed. She sat at her desk with a cup of Earl Grey steaming beside her, staring at the final draft of the mentorship program proposal. Printed, stapled, real. 3 months ago, she hadn't been able to breathe without wondering what was falling apart around her. Now, she was piecing together something not just whole, but meaningful. She glanced at the calendar. The nonprofit board review was in 2 days. Her hand hovered over the envelope, fingers brushing the corner. It was ready. But she wasn't sure she was. Before she could spiral, her phone buzzed. Daniel. The city inspector's early. Any chance you're free to be charming and composed for 20 minutes? I forgot how to use verbs under stress. She smiled and typed back. On my way. But if you're bribing me with coffee, it better be strong. double shot waiting. The warehouse smelled of fresh sawdust and wet brick when she arrived. Daniel stood near the front door with a clipboard and his usual calm but slightly panicked energy. The inspector was mid-sentence when Camille stepped inside. "And if you're planning to serve food, you'll need a commercial-grade ventilation system in the cafe wing." "We've got that in the revised plans," Daniel said, waving him toward the table. "Camille, this is Mr. Greer." Camille extended her hand. "Nice to meet you. I've been helping shape the community programming. This project means a lot to us." Greer nodded, flipping pages on the clipboard. "It's an ambitious space, but I like what I'm seeing. Charleston needs more of this. Something grounded but forward-thinking." Daniel looked at Camille and mouthed, "Charming and composed. Told you." They walked the inspector through the main floor, pointing out everything from accessible entrances to shared studio spaces. Camille could feel the energy growing between them, not just as collaborators, but as people slowly realizing they were building something deeper together. When Greer finally signed off with a "Looks good, keep me posted," Daniel exhaled like he'd been underwater all morning. Camille leaned against one of the exposed beams. "That wasn't so bad." "You say that like you didn't rescue me." She raised an eyebrow. "You did fine." "You only forgot how to form full sentences twice." He stepped closer, smiling. "I only forget how to talk when you're in the room." She didn't laugh, not out of discomfort, but because the words landed too sincerely to be brushed off. Instead, she looked up at him. "So, what happens next?" Daniel took her hand, but it wasn't romantic. It was intentional. "We start final prep. Then we open. Then we let the city show up. And us?" His thumb grazed her knuckles. "We let it keep unfolding." That night, Camille sat on her porch, watching the rain slide off the edges of the railing, the air fragrant with wet grass and night jasmine. She didn't feel restless anymore. For once, she didn't need to be anywhere else, with anyone else, doing anything more. The stillness was full, earned. A knock sounded lightly at the doorframe behind her. She turned to see Ruthie Mae, Grant's mother, standing under an umbrella. For a moment, Camille couldn't speak. She stood, slowly, eyes narrowing just slightly in surprise. "I hope I'm not intruding," Ruthie Mae said. "I just wanted to check in. May I?" Camille nodded, stepping aside. "Of course." They moved inside, the rain still whispering against the windows. Ruthie Mae's coat glistened as she folded it over one arm. Her silver hair was neatly pinned, her expression gentle but serious. "I won't stay long," she said, settling on the edge of the armchair. "I came because I owed you something." Camille sat across from her, heart calm but curious. "You don't owe me anything." "I do," Ruthie Mae said softly. "I judged you. I assumed you'd forgive him, quietly, like so many of us were taught to do. I thought you would fold." Camille met her eyes. "I thought I might too. But you didn't," she said. "You stood. You held the line. You made a choice I was too afraid to make at your age." Camille blinked, unsure how to respond. "Grant told me everything before he left," Ruthie Mae continued. "He didn't defend himself. For once, he didn't hide. And when I asked him what hurt most, he said it wasn't the loss of reputation or marriage. It was realizing he wasn't the man you deserved." Camille's throat tightened. "I won't ask for details," Ruthie Mae said. "But I see you now. And I wanted to say, I'm proud of you, truly." Camille's voice wavered slightly. "Thank you." That means more than you know. They sat for a moment longer, letting the silence fill the spaces left behind by years of unspoken tension. Before leaving, Ruthie May paused at the door. If you ever want support for that mentorship program, I have friends with foundations who love a cause led by a woman who doesn't flinch. Camille smiled. I'll let you know. When she was gone, Camille returned to her porch. The rain had eased into a gentle mist. Somewhere in the distance, wind chimes danced lightly in the breeze. She felt the shift again. The past wasn't reaching for her anymore. It was simply waving goodbye. The evening was still. The sky above Charleston dipped in soft amber and fading lavender as the final guests filtered into the newly restored brick space on Broad Street. Warm light glowed from hanging Edison bulbs, and soft acoustic music hummed through the air, echoing off the exposed beams and smooth concrete floors. Camille stood by the entry table, a glass of sparkling water in hand, watching her vision unfold around her. She had worried about this night, worried it wouldn't live up to the promise she'd made to herself, to make something meaningful out of the pieces she'd once thought were too broken to salvage. But now, as she watched a woman in her 60s laugh with a college student over business startup plans, as she saw a pair of young mothers filling out mentorship forms while their toddlers colored at a side table, she felt it deep in her chest. She had built something real. The foundation room was finally open. The community resource center and mentorship hub she and Daniel had dreamed up, on a napkin, then on a blueprint, and now in brick and breath. It wasn't polished. Not everything was finished. The corner shelf still needed painting, and someone had forgotten to print the donation slips. But it was alive. Daniel appeared beside her, sleeves rolled, tie tucked into his pocket, the tiniest smudge of paint still on his forearm from the gallery wall. Touch-up he refused to delegate. You look like someone trying very hard not to cry, he said. Camille laughed, her eyes welling anyway. I told myself I wouldn't. I told myself I'd stop bringing you pastries every week, she smirked. And yet, here we are. He held out a small paper bag. You didn't. He shrugged. Almond croissant. For tradition. She took the bag, gently, fingers brushing his. You really don't know how to let things go, do you? Only the things that were never mine to begin with. Camille turned to face him fully. And this? Us? Daniel's smile softened. That was never about possession. This has always been choice. Before she could speak, a voice called from across the room. Camille, the photographer's ready for you near the mural. She nodded, then looked back at Daniel. Stay close? Always. The mural had been her favorite idea from the beginning. It stood at the back of the space, a collaborative painting featuring the handprints of every woman who'd contributed to the build-out. Mentors, mentees, architects, artists, donors. Layers of fingerprints forming a tree with roots stretching deep and branches climbing high. Beneath it, in simple script, begin again. Boldly. Camille stood beneath the words, smiling for the photo, her eyes drifting to the wall's base, where her own handprint, in teal, overlapped with Daniel's in charcoal gray. After the pictures, she wandered back toward the cafe corner, where Ruthie May stood near the coffee urn, chatting with a pair of city council members. Don't let the pearls fool you, Ruthie May was saying. She didn't just plan this space, she fought for it. Every zoning permit, every funding pitch. Camille built this like it was her second spine. Camille chuckled as she approached. Should I start charging you as my publicist? Ruthie May turned, grinning. Only if I get a table named after me. You drive a hard bargain." The older woman stepped closer, resting a gentle hand on Camille's arm. "Your parents would have been so proud. You've made this city better." Camille swallowed the lump in her throat. "Thank you." "For everything." Before Ruthie May could reply, Savannah appeared, phone in hand, cheeks flushed. "The keynote's starting in 10, and someone's already tagged you in 3 dozen posts." 3 dozen? "You're officially a Charleston institution now," Savannah said. "Sorry, no going back." Camille followed her toward the makeshift stage near the main wall, where a small mic had been set up beside the donor plaques. Guests gathered, chatting softly, settling into rows of folding chairs. She took a breath before stepping up. "I don't want to take up much of your time," she began, voice steady but low. "Because tonight isn't about speeches. It's about spaces." The room quieted. "This space was born out of loss, out of a version of my life that no longer fit. And for a while I thought starting over meant pretending the past never happened." She paused, eyes skimming the crowd. "But healing," she continued, "isn't about erasure. It's about integration. It's about looking at the pieces of your story. Yes, even the ones you didn't choose, and saying, 'You're part of me. But you don't define me.'" A few heads nodded. A few eyes shimmered. This room was built with hands that had failed, dreamed, hurt, and hoped again. It's imperfect, so are we. But that's what makes it real. Camille closed her notes. "I hope, when you walk through these doors, you feel something. Not just inspiration, but invitation. To build, to begin, to believe again." The applause was quiet at first, then rose like a warm tide. Later that night, long after the last guest had left, Camille stood alone in the center of the room, the mural dim in the low evening light. She turned slowly, letting the silence wrap around her like a soft shawl. She didn't hear Daniel enter, just felt him behind her, steady as ever. "Tired?" he asked. "Grateful," she said. He walked toward her, slowly, eyes searching hers. "Camille." "Yes?" "I think I love you." The words weren't rushed, not desperate. Just true. She didn't speak right away. She stepped into him, resting her forehead against his chest, letting the truth of everything they'd become settle between them. "I think," she whispered, "I love you too." He didn't ask for anything more, and she didn't need to explain, because love, real love, didn't demand immediate answers. It waited. It walked beside you. It believed in what could be built from what was once broken. And as the lights dimmed around them, and the mural stood watching like a witness to everything they'd endured, Camille finally understood. Some tables are meant to be left behind. But the ones you build yourself, those are the ones you get to invite the right people to. And this time, she had. If you enjoyed this video, comment 1 to let me know. If not, comment 2. Your thought mattered to me either way.